Okay, this is the Practical Spirituality podcast with Phil Smith. On this podcast, this is my first ever one. I'm here with my guest today, Donna, Carole from Newquay Therapy Centre and of Love Consciousness.
Yeah, great to be here, Phil. Exciting.
Good to see you. We're over at her place. She's got a podcast called the Love Consciousness podcast.
Yeah, so Love Consciousness, and again, that's going to be a new thing. Obviously, we're all in this lockdown situation, and it's a great opportunity, I think, for us all to do these kinds of things that perhaps we've wanted to do for a long time, but we always make the excuse that we don't have the time.
Yes.
So
now we've got no excuse.
We've got no excuse, so here we are.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Reluctantly,
yeah, like nervously, reluctantly.
Kicking and screaming.
Yeah. So
great. Well, we're finally doing it.
We're doing it.
So, and I've wanted to do a podcast for a few years. I don't know about you.
Yeah. I've done a couple, and I think I said to you the other day, I've done a couple. They are on SoundCloud. I've not listened back to them for a long time because I just feel that actually, that my knowledge on the subjects that I was talking about have come on so far now that I think that I might cringe a little bit listening to them. But yeah, it's still a little bit of practice, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's all an evolution.
It's all you can only improve, can't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
awesome. So this is the Practical Spirituality podcast. We're kicking off our podcasts at the same time. So the next time round, it will be you interviewing me. Am I going to be your first guest?
Yeah, you'll be my first guest.
Very nice. So kind of the content of this podcast is going to be emotional, mental, physical and spiritual health, consciousness, exercise, diet and nutrition, things like that. That's the kind of stuff I'm going to cover on it. Probably, I want to try and keep it casual.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's
good.
Just see how it goes.
You happy with casual?
I'm happy with casual. I think it's the best way.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
So you picked the subject for today, didn't you?
Well,
would you like to introduce your subject for today?
Yeah, I mean, a subject that's really fascinated me for a long time, and I think that, a lot of people are quite fascinated by this subject, and I think particularly due to Dr. Bruce Lipton, is the subject of beliefs. Now, as a therapist myself, I came across Dr. Bruce Lipton probably around 7 years ago now. And I watched his what do you call it? Presentation on the biology of belief, and it literally was like pennies dropping everywhere for me. It was just like one of those moments where, from that moment onwards, the way that I worked as a therapist completely changed. I immediately got the concept of it all. I immediately started researching ways in which you could install beliefs as quickly as possible and change beliefs. And I immediately, as I do with all my therapeutic techniques, I immediately started practicing on myself. So, pulling up any negative beliefs that I had and reinstalling more positive beliefs. But I don't think that a lot of people out there understand how powerful beliefs are on our experience of our personal reality. And I think that that's kind of what I'd like to explore tonight, if you're up for that.
I'm very up for that. Yeah. That sounds really, really, really good fun.
Yeah, I mean, what's your take sort of on your concept of beliefs? Obviously, you're a therapist too. I mean, how did you first get introduced to the concept of what beliefs were and that you could change them? And
the first introduction that I had to beliefs was through an audio book that I listened to, and that was before I started my therapy, like my counselling training and everything, and that was back in maybe 2010. Is when I I call it my first awakening.
Yeah,
It was the first. It was the first awakening. I had a big change of perspective, and I started having lots of shifts, and I started reading books, and that was my.
Yeah.
I call that my awakening.
Yeah.
Although I see my awakening as an ongoing process, that was the big shift where I had an initial kind of jolt.
It's almost the point where you realise that you can compare yourself to a computer program in a lot of ways, so it's all just programming and it's not set.
Yeah.
And I certainly would call that an awakening period in my life as well.
Really?
Yeah, for sure.
What, around about that time?
I mean, I would say that I've had, like you say, you don't have one awakening, do you?
No,
that awakening
I don't
comes
think so.
In bursts.
Yeah.
But it was most certainly a very significant point in my life because it allowed me to then make lots of changes that were unbelievably positive in every way. Yeah,
it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'll never forget it. But during after that period when I was engaging in material that was new to me, that was all a part of my awakening. One of the first time I ever had an awareness of beliefs was an audio book, and it was by Dr. Joe Vitale.
Okay.
Have you heard of him?
I'm not sure, actually. Yes.
He's a coach. He was in The Secret, the movie
actually,
The Secret.
Yes, I have heard of him.
Yeah.
And actually, when I touched on beliefs, I also came across.
Did you?
Yeah, for sure.
Instant Manifestation, it was. The program that I listened to.
Because it's all tied in, actually, isn't it? Once you begin to understand it.
Yeah. And it was a huge, and ever since then, my understanding of beliefs has been an ongoing process of gaining understanding. I don't, like everything else, I don't ever feel like my understanding of something is the finished article. I sort of see it as a process.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So just before when I have a sort of want to understand something more about something, I'll kind of have this I'll be thinking about it and I have this confusion, and then I'll kind of sleep on it. And then it'll just come to me, and then it'll expand my understanding even further. So
of course.
It'll be really interesting to see where
it goes.
Talking to you and how it can expand my understanding of beliefs. Yeah.
I mean, do you think we should maybe tell the guys that are listening a little bit about what beliefs are, how they're created? Because, I mean, again, going back to thinking about when you first come across beliefs and when I first come across beliefs, you're not aware of a lot of how your beliefs are created and how they affect your experience. So, I mean, do you want to explain from your perspective, or would you like me?
Yeah, no, I can go first.
Yeah, go for it,
So, my definition of a belief would be I see beliefs as being programmed in two ways.
Yeah.
So the first way, and beliefs all come from, arise as a result of experience. So the two main ways that I see beliefs happening in us in our minds is through having experiences and then deciding upon what that experience meant. So it's a statement about your experiences and then deciding what it meant. And that fits in with my trauma model in the self-reintegration modality.
Yeah.
And in that model, it describes in the trauma model that we have an experience. We make an interpretation, which is filtered through our previous beliefs and our values, just to try and keep it basic. It's filtered through a whole load of other more complicated stuff than that. But so we make an interpretation of an external stimuli. We filter it through our existing beliefs and our values and who we are. Then we get an emotion. Sort of, it triggers an emotion. We feel an emotion, and then if we have then the weight of the magnitude of the emotion then fuels the statement about it that we make with regards to the truth of what we've experienced. So in the trauma model from SRT, it's described as this: we have an experience, we make an interpretation, and we feel a negative emotion. So we'll
or a positive emotion.
Or a positive emotion.
Yeah.
And I'd like to talk about that more, because I've been so wrapped up in the trauma model of that modality and putting it together. It's got to work both ways, right? Yeah, we can really explore that.
Yeah.
So we have an experience, we feel an emotion, and then we make a statement about what that experience meant based on how it felt. So it's a statement about reality that we decide is true.
Yeah.
And it always tends to be about people, myself, or the world. I am, or I am not something. People are, or they are not something. The world is, or it is not something. So it arises as a result of experience, and it can be a statement that we make about reality. And then the other way is, as far as I'm aware, and I'm sure I'm going to have a lot more knowledge about this after this conversation, I'm really stoked about that. The other way that I see it happening is they can just be directly programmed in, just through our cultural conditioning. We can just, it's not necessarily that we decided to believe it, or maybe on an unconscious level we chose to accept it.
Would you mind if I kind of give my take on
Yes,
that?
I'd love to hear that.
So when I'm training my students on beliefs, one of the things that we obviously talk about, first of all, is your core beliefs.
Yeah.
And the core beliefs being the beliefs that you create or are created within those first 7 years of your life, the programming years.
Yeah, the imprint years.
And so what you're saying there about beliefs just kind of being programmed in, that you don't consciously make that choice of programming them in, so to speak, that most certainly happens more often than not within those programming
in the first
years.
7 years.
Now, people are often, it's quite a fascinating thing to say to someone, most of your core beliefs aren't even your own. They didn't come from you. You know, they came from your mum, your dad, your caregivers, your teachers, your brothers, your sisters. In other words, in your first 7 years of life, and what they've discovered is children within the first 7 years of their life, their brain waves correlate with hypnosis, which is a theta brainwave state, which means that they're basically just on record all the time. Now, doing the work that I do with emotions, I discovered something else that I find quite fascinating. So a lot of the very first really negative or positive, but we're working with negative emotions, can be stemmed right back to being 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old. And what's really interesting is very often the emotion is created first before the belief is attached onto the emotion. So what normally happens is, let's say you've got a little boy and he's like 4 years old and he comes home from his first day at school and he's really excited. He's got this picture and he wants to show mum, and he runs in the kitchen and mum's on the phone and she's had a terrible day and she's dealing with something awful and she just dismisses him and says, get to your room. So he goes up to his room and he doesn't think at that point, I'm not good enough, or I'm not a good artist, or, I'm not loved. But he feels this wounded heart, this emotion. And then what you often find is that the emotion comes first, and then as he continues to re-experience that emotion, his analytical brain kicks in, and later on he'll then attach. What does this emotion mean? It means I'm not good enough, or it means that I'm not lovable, or it means that I can't draw, or whatever that might be. So I almost feel that emotions and beliefs in those programming years, they kind of go hand in hand. Sometimes they're created together. For example, if an adult was to say to a child, you're no good and you'll never amount to anything, they get the belief and the emotion at the same time. But very often they'll get the emotion first because they've not been about long enough to analyse what that feeling means yet. So by the time they get to about 7, then they're moving into a new brainwave state, which is the alpha. Still fairly programmable, but not so much so. And they've kind of got a map of their emotional and their mental kind of understanding of, as you said, who they are in the world, who other people are in the world, and what the world is like to them. So it's quite fascinating. And these are your really, really deep core beliefs, which seem like they are unchangeable.
Yeah.
But they are changeable, and that's what's fascinating about it. And I won't go too much into it now because I'm sure we'll get to it later on, but it's when you change these core beliefs that you have some really amazing shifts in your sense of self, or your sense of the world, or your sense of others. So I mean, you as you're into beliefs as well, I'm sure that you've heard all of these concepts before.
Yeah, it's just really interesting to hear it from your perspective. And funnily enough, I'm having a bit of a synchronistic experience right now, because recently, in this week in particular, I have been reflecting on my understanding of beliefs quite a bit, and I had the desire to expand it, and that's happening like right now.
All right, so you asked, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing is just
it's crazy.
Like that, isn't it?
Yeah, I like that.
So and I love that, having conversations with you, and just getting all of this stuff out there. Just we fill in the blanks for each other, and hearing it from another person's perspective just helps to gain an even broader
like you
understanding
said, you're
of
always learning. You know, you never know
Yeah.
all. You're always having these aha moments where something that you felt like you knew for a long time, you suddenly understand it at that deeper level.
Yes.
And it's that extra depth, and you go, oh, right, I really get it now. And then another few years down the line, get it even more. So you're always learning, you're always adding to it. Going on from the programming years.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about how these beliefs then shape and mould your sense of reality? Because I think that, again, I don't think a lot of people realise, do they? How these, it's like programs that are created, that are running, and as you said, filters and emotions, and your beliefs are running through all of these systems that then kind of create your sense of your reality.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some really simple ways of kind of explaining it.
Yeah, I mean, I one particular model comes to mind.
Okay.
I'd like, before that, I'll talk about that. But before that, it's, I think, like, what happens with the emotions, and then the things that we decide, or that we're programmed with, the things that we come to believe, however we come to believe them. It all happens as a result of experience, and everything that we experience kind of gets recorded in our unconscious, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So and then when we experience new things, we experience it through the lens of what we've already experienced. It's a reference point, isn't it? It's an unconscious frame of reference.
Yeah, of course.
We don't know it's happening. Yeah. And we're not educated to understand that.
Yeah, we're not, because it's. I mean, the subconscious mind. You know, the subconscious mind is just below our conscious awareness. So all of these mechanisms are running and functioning just below what we're aware of. Yeah. So we're not always aware of it, and I think that that's a big part of becoming more self-aware. Actually, is that you begin to identify these beliefs and these emotions that have been running the show.
Absolutely. Self-awareness of the elements of yourself, the workings of how you function, and the content of the things that you're unconscious of. So for me, self-awareness is about making the unconscious conscious.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Or at least as much of it as you can.
Yeah, at any one time.
And again, I think that's all you're creating a model. You know, I think everything just becomes you're creating a sense of a model that you can understand about yourself. Yeah. You know. Yeah.
And it's necessary, because we need to have some kind of understanding through which to view the world, because then otherwise we may not have a sense of reality at all. Yeah, so I think that it's necessary. Beliefs are necessary when we feel like we can have a framework through which to view things. It gives it structure, and we feel safe. Yeah. So that's the positive element to it. You know.
There's also, there's collective beliefs. the things that we will collectively believe is true,
Yeah,
and then
cultural.
there's also cultural, and then of course there's personal beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we all agree that the sky is blue, you know, on a sunny day, hopefully. But then there's those, again, going back to the core beliefs or just personal beliefs. It might be core belief, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not loved. Or it might just be your preference of, I like this because of this. And they're the, you know, the talking kind of beyond core beliefs, just kind of your everyday beliefs. They can change throughout your existence, really, on the planet.
And then we can add beliefs to beliefs. We can have beliefs about beliefs, and then beliefs about beliefs about beliefs. It's just more junk we're chucking in our unconscious all the time, you know.
I'm obviously, with the job I do, I'm really interested in the programming side of things, you know, looking at it like a program. And one of the things that astonishes me, and I've experienced this, so, you know, going back to when I first discovered beliefs, and I first discovered Bruce Lipton, and I got really excited. And obviously my next journey was, I need to find out how to change beliefs. So, you know, you're like a maniac. I was like researching and just figuring out different modalities and different techniques. And back then, I mean, how long? We're talking about 7 years ago or so. It took longer than it does now. You know, the techniques that were available, the knowledge that was available, it took longer to reprogram beliefs as it does now. But let's say, you know, I found a technique that I could probably program in a new belief within, you know, a week, let's say, with a little bit of work. But it is quite fascinating, because going back to, you know, your beliefs create the way that you experience your world, you can feel on many levels when that belief has actually shifted. So the example that I'd probably give is, let's say someone held the belief, I'm not good enough. And they were stuck in a dead-end job that they didn't like, and, you know, there was always chance for promotion there, but they didn't think they were good enough for that promotion. And so whenever a promotion would come up, they wouldn't apply, because I'm just not good enough for that.
But they wouldn't be aware of the belief.
They wouldn't
be
aware.
The thoughts would be just
because then that's where the emotional element comes in, isn't it? Whenever you go towards something like that promotion, and you feel that kind of sense of anxiety or whatever it is, what do? You step back. You go, oh, no, I can't do that. I'm not capable of doing that.
And we're talking comfort zones in a way, aren't we?
But it's even more fascinating than that. Let's say that you decided that you wanted to look for a new job. And so you start looking through newspapers and job adverts, and, you know, you've got all these skills. It's not like you're not an intelligent person, you know, and you've got all the experience, and there and all around you is these ads of jobs that would be absolutely perfect for you. But you won't even notice them.
No,
you will dismiss them as though they don't even exist, and you'll say there's nothing available for me. And then that's what's fascinating. As soon as you then reprogram that belief, suddenly all these opportunities open up for you. And that's what I loved about it. And when I first experienced that, I was like, again, like a maniac. I wanted to reprogram as many negative beliefs as I could pull up from inside of myself. And I did. I went on a journey for about 6 months, and literally that's all I did. And by the end of it, I was almost unrecognisable as a person in my level of confidence, in my level of self-worth, what I was capable of, what I could do, and it changed everything for me. Not only that, it changed the way I worked as a therapist, and I managed to pass this knowledge into my therapy practice and help my clients do exactly the same. And it, you know, amazing shifts.
Can I ask you how did you go about changing that within yourself? Like, did you see another? I know that we've worked together a lot, but did you do
Do you know what? It's really difficult for me to remember because it was a long time ago. Because I read it wasn't like I goes, "There's a book. I'm going to read through this book and I'm going to take that info." I literally was watching YouTube. I was researching on the internet.
Yeah.
There's 3 or 4 books that I'll have to dig out, and they weren't well-known authors. They were kind of like, really random. But I was just pulling at anything that I could find.
Yeah.
And there was a particular technique, and it was a little bit of repetition, but it was also breaking down the idea of the old belief.
Yes.
So it went something like this. Now I've readapted these techniques so many times over the last 7 years. It's really difficult, but it went something like this. That you take the old belief, let's say I'm not good enough, and you begin to give yourself as many reasons as you can why that's absolute rubbish, why it doesn't serve you anymore, why it's not good for you. And so you're just kind of like, you're basically cramming all this information into your mind that's saying, this belief does not do me any good. And anyone that works in the subconscious mind will know that actually everything serves a purpose. Even those negative beliefs serve some kind of purpose. And if you can convince your mind that they don't serve a purpose anymore, you're going to loosen it up at least to begin with. It's not going to be so concrete. Part of your mind's kind of going, oh, actually, do I really need this? This isn't doing me any good. But then, of course, it's important to balance it out. So on the flip side, your new belief, I am good enough. Why would it be amazing for me to believe this? Can I find truth? Can I give my brain examples of where I am good enough? And you create this kind of flip within your mind, I suppose. And the brain loves evidence as well. So giving the evidence of why the new belief is true. And doing that over a number of days. And as I said to you before, you don't need to ask yourself, oh, do I believe that now? You can feel it. Like the shift in your energy, the shift in your emotional state, the shift in your perception. Deep in your heart that you now believe that to be true. And, where we're at now, and I'm not going to take all the credit for this because it's, there's some amazing people out there, Bruce Lipton, Joe Dispenza, there's an amazing hypnotherapist that I like listening to, David Snyder, and little bits of that information, including all the other stuff that I've read. I can drop a new belief into the subconscious mind now in under a minute.
That's amazing.
It takes it takes 3 days, not even 3 days, it takes up to 3 days to give it some roots to make sure it stays. But I mean, that's just mind-blowing. That's how quickly you can shift a belief. That's where we're at now. And it's just so worth exploring. Like, I recommend everyone that's listening to this, if you have not explored changing negative beliefs, do it. Learn it.
It's huge.
It's massive.
It's absolutely huge. It reminds me of like that model that came to mind earlier. I didn't actually mention. It's just one way of seeing it. Another way of seeing it was the NLP communication model, which is not my favourite, but one really handy model that always sticks in my mind. It was one that I saw when I was at college doing my counselling training, and we were doing a bit of CBT. And they had this model, and it was they called it the mental crusher.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it was a bit like, if you could imagine, like a head, a little bit like in the NLP communication model. You've got the head, and then you've got the information coming in, which is the external environment, the stimuli. And then it had lots of different shapes and stuff. And then inside the head had this thing called the mental crusher. And basically what it done was, all of the shapes that came in, it crushed and compressed them to fit the shapes of the slots that were inside of it. And that's what beliefs do, isn't it?
It's quite
bends,
a good metaphor.
it distorts, it generalizes, it unconsciously this happens. It molds the information coming in to fit with the belief, and you only see what you believe,
what you want to believe,
and you don't see what you don't believe. And this is why the phenomenon, funnily enough, we were talking a little bit about this earlier with Lana, with your daughter Lana, of when I'm pretty sure that most people have experienced this. Okay, so when you see where you're made aware of a new car for the first time, like I don't know, the new Mini.
Everyone can relate to this.
Yeah, man, and it's like, have you seen the new Mini? And it's like, the new Mini.
Suddenly it's everywhere.
I don't know why I chose Mini, but and then you see it everywhere.
It's the same.
Why
it's
do you see it everywhere?
Pregnant women, like I know that women always say this. If you're pregnant or if you know someone that's pregnant, suddenly everyone's pregnant. Or it doesn't matter what it is. Once you bring something into your awareness, then suddenly you notice it, you see it. The filters in your mind are allowing you to zoom in, home in on it. But what experience have you had in changing your own beliefs, Phil?
Well, I've done some great work with you. Yeah, fantastic. Just life changing. I think that when I'm working on beliefs in myself, so because we've had a lot of practice with working with my subconscious, unconscious, subconscious. Maybe we could talk a bit about the difference in a minute, because I know that you're quite well versed in that. But so I find that when I'm what I try to do is I try to chunk down through my thoughts of how about something that I'm experiencing into my belief. And that's I've learned that by doing CBT and by doing NLP. So I try to do that, and the way and I know that the gateway to that, of course, is relaxation, because you have to get through that barrier of the analytical mind down into the subconscious. You have to alter your brainwave states. I know that's the key. So if I'm having a difficulty with something, I'll first thing I'll do is I'll try to relax. And I'll reflect. So and then I'll reflect on. I know that beliefs are statements about reality that we say is true. So therefore, we've derived meaning from reality. So I ask myself, what does this mean?
Does it mean to me?
Yeah, what does it mean to me? And then I just keep asking myself that question, and it gets deeper and deeper. And then I'll hit on the belief, and then sometimes I'll get a memory.
Right.
So it'll kind of be about the time of when I decided to believe that.
Or at least it's a memory of what you can consciously remember of a time you experienced.
Exactly, and that's often when I come to see you, and then you take me back even further. And I'm like, whoa.
Take you back to being two.
Totally. So then what I'll do is, if I can get wherever I get to with it, and it depends on how unconscious it is. It depends on how much emotion underpins it. So I find that when I get to the nitty gritty of a belief, then I'll hit an emotion.
Right.
If it's something that's self-sabotaging or something that just doesn't serve me.
Generally, we'd only be trying to figure that out if
it was. Otherwise, it's all good, isn't it?
It's all good.
So and then I'll acknowledge. It's almost as if I start here at the top of my head, in my conscious mind, and then I'll go through. I'll start to ask myself the questions as I'm relaxing, and I'll go deeper and deeper, and then I'll get down into the beliefs when I get to around about here. And then when I go deeper and deeper and I cut down through the belief, underneath it, I'll get to the emotion, and that's when I'm in my body, and I'll feel it in my body where it is. And then if I'm just doing it by myself, and I can just do this throughout, in the day when I'm doing other stuff, I'll tap into the emotion, and then I'll identify it as a bit of sadness or a bit of hurt or whatever, and I'll just let it, and I'll release the emotion and allow it to come up. And allow it to come out of my tears, and then I've processed the emotion. That holds up the whole program. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. I mean, again, emotions are so connected to the thoughts. I always say that emotion's the fuel. If there is no emotion, then the thought, it's not good or bad or negative or positive, is it? It's just a thought. But generally, you'll always find that there is a negative emotion there if it's a negative belief.
Yeah, generally.
Another really good way, really, really simple way, and I think that this kind of comes from the modality of EFT, although EFT would be doing the whole tapping thing while they're tapping in.
Tapping meridians?
Tapping meridians, yeah. But I mean, the way that the idea comes from that I found that the tapping wasn't necessary. And it's just tuning into the feeling of the emotion, relaxing, as you said. That's really important to try and just close that chatter of the mind down, just by taking a few deep breaths, just centering yourself, focusing on the emotion, and then just gently asking yourself the question over and over again, where does this come from?
Where does this come from? Yeah.
And what happens is you're asking your subconscious mind the right question, and what will happen is things will start to come up. And when you ask the question, the subconscious mind does give you the answer, as long as you don't let your analytical mind get in the way and start going, well, that doesn't seem right, I'm just going to ignore that. Because it's amazing how things come up and we just dismiss them. We don't look at them and go, actually, is there anything in this? But when you look at it and you dig into it, you might realise that the belief came from a moment that now seems very silly, and you would dismiss it as an adult, but it still created the negative emotion. You know, some examples of that, obviously I don't want to mention any names, confidentiality, was someone that had severe anxiety, and it was always at night time, regressed her back to being 3-year-old, and it was Christmas Eve and she was afraid of Santa Claus coming into her house at night. You know, so it can be that simple. As an adult, as soon as you realise that's where the anxiety comes, it's almost, it breaks the spell. You know, and then whatever beliefs you've attached onto that anxiety. So it's just someone's going to break into my house in the middle of the night. Or whatever it might be.
It's and I think that, like, a part of the problem with this and why we end up building up so much in the way of limiting core beliefs and trauma is because as we get older and our conscious mind develops, as our brain develops, the neocortex, prefrontal cortex develops. That's the analytical mind. It's the thinking mind. As that develops, we develop also the ability to be able to deny our deepest feelings. And it's interesting what you say about it coming up and then pushing it to one side. We do a lot of in our culture pushing it down.
We do.
And cultural beliefs are not wholly, but they take a lot of responsibility for that, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
it's not okay to cry.
Yeah, we live in a society, and I've said this so many times, and it frustrates me because I'm not even sure how much education includes emotional health in, you know, the teaching. And the one thing that every single human being on the whole entire planet has in common is the same set of emotions. Why are we never taught what these emotions are? Why are we never taught how to process them or manage them, or even what the meaning of them is? You know, and I think that alone, you know, obviously we live in the UK and it's that very repressed. I mean, not so much now, I'm happy to say, but I think that we've come from a very repressed history, background.
Totally.
And each generation before the last was even more repressed. And stiff upper lip and, you know, just brush yourself down and get on. And so what you're doing, as you said, you're constantly repressing the way that you feel. You're not allowed to express the most natural thing to us, which is our human emotions.
Absolutely.
And therefore, if you repress, and this is another thing, we'll do a podcast on this, my take on depression. I mean, one of the first things about depression is a repressed emotion. It's something you've not dealt with, you've pushed it down and you've ignored it. And it gets heavier and heavier. And then, of course, you've got all the symptoms of depression. You know. But cultural beliefs around emotions, cultural beliefs around, like you said, boys, you know, should be tough. And
so and they block us from having a relationship. All of the messages that we get through our culture and our society block us from having they block us off from our unconscious.
They do.
And then we don't have a relationship with it. And then it becomes scary
Yeah.
Because it produces fear
as the emotions that you've been hiding from your
and then
whole
that's
life.
what produces fear, isn't it? That's really the main culprit that is the unresolved beliefs and emotions that are causing that fear. Because what are we afraid of? We're afraid of re-experiencing. So we just carry on pushing it down and distracting ourselves with all of the distractions that we've got.
That's it's probably an interesting thing that I was thinking, because of everyone being on lockdown and self-isolating, and so many people are used to working and distracting and going out, and then suddenly we're now in this position where families are having to learn how to be together, not just for an hour or two at a time, but round the clock. Suddenly, husbands and wives that don't ever have that time, suddenly individuals that distract themselves all day long, they've got nothing to do now. I mean, don't get me wrong, we can distract ourselves around the house long enough, but you can only do that for so long before we start becoming kind of lethargic and unhappy, and then you eventually just need to look at yourself, don't you?
Slowly the distractions start to diminish. Then you have only got the choices for where you can put your focus start to reduce, and eventually the feelings that you've been distracting yourself from start to arise, and the only place that you can really look if you want to adapt and change and grow from it is inside.
I mean, I would say to anyone listening, particularly if you're listening throughout this lockdown period, is use this period to look at yourself. Use this period to identify any negative emotions or feelings that you've been hiding from. Realise, obviously, on the subject tonight, that all of those feelings are connected to a belief or beliefs, and that there are very simple techniques that are available for free. If you do your research, if you have a look around, where you can begin to pull them up, identify them, question them, change them. Therefore, healing the emotional element at the same time. Therefore, becoming more connected to yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it causes that disconnect, doesn't it? All these negative feelings, negative emotions.
Disconnection from ourselves, and then when we disconnect from ourselves, we disconnect from each other. Don't we?
Of course we do. I mean, again, going back to kind of say a husband and wife or a relationship dynamic. If someone's been having real problems, a couple having real problems, suddenly they're on lockdown together. That must be a bloody hard situation to deal with. And it is really, really difficult when you get into that scenario of kind of, not seeing eye to eye and not understanding each other and kind of triggering each other all the time. And, if you're in that situation particularly, even if you stop trying to get your partner to change during this time, retrieve a little bit and spend some time focusing on yourself. Focusing on your own needs, self-care, your self-beliefs, whatever it is that you need. Self-reflection. And it is quite fascinating, that's kind of going back to the law of attraction again. It's very fascinating when you begin to change your beliefs, how suddenly you end up creating a slightly different dynamic with individuals in your relationship. Because they're not triggering you anymore. They're not triggering you. You're not flying off the handle. And so then,
you're not reacting, then you're not triggering them back. Exactly. The whole dynamic changes. It only takes one to change for the dynamic to change. But that doesn't always happen. I mean, we're talking outside of abuse here.
Of course. I'm not saying that 100% of the time if you change, then suddenly you've got a healthy, beautiful relationship. Sometimes people just aren't meant to be together. But you're not going to be triggering each other. You're not going to be fighting as much. If you do decide that person's not for you, you leave in a more calm, settled place, rather than, oh my God, I'm in despair, I need to get out of here,
but because if you, without all of the emotions and beliefs being triggered, if you come to that decision, you come to it based on values, don't you? And that can be done in an adult way.
Yeah,
you know, it's okay. From an adult perspective, if we don't share values and we disagree and we don't decide to in an intimate relationship be together, or in any relationship, if we don't decide that we have the same direction, or we want the same things, I think a sign of maturity is the ability to agree to disagree.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And obviously we're on the subject of relationships. If an individual holds a lot of, or more likely a lack of self-love, that's a big one. People loving themselves, that's a very deeply ingrained into our culture, into our society, belief that many people hold. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of this relationship. I don't deserve to be happy. Are all really core beliefs that kind of can create a lack of confidence in the individual. And that lack of confidence can then create barriers within their personal relationships. And if someone doesn't believe they're good enough, for example, this is a very common one. Let's say, the wife is all dressed up, whatever, she's ready to go out, and she says to her husband, do I look nice? And if he was to say anything other than no, so let's say, for example, of course he's going to say yes, you look lovely. But let's say, and even though he says she looks lovely, she won't accept that if she doesn't actually believe it. So there he is, he's always telling her she's beautiful, he's always telling her she's lovely, he's always telling her that she's amazing, but yet she will just reject those compliments. But the one time that he says something negative, like, I'm not sure I like that outfit on you, she will cling on to that. And she will forget the 100 times that she's been complimented and only fixate onto that one time when she wasn't. Why is that? Because it was that one time that matched her beliefs and not the rest. And that's why it's so important to think about your beliefs and explore your beliefs and see if you hold beliefs that might be damaging your self-esteem, your relationships. They're all connected.
Everything's connected, isn't it?
All connected.
There's no separation of any aspect of life, really, when you look at it.
Definitely.
When you look at it deeply. How are we doing for time?
Yeah, we're about there.
Are we good?
Yeah, we're ready to wind up.
That went fast.
Do you feel there's anything that, it's obviously a very brief outline. We probably could go on for about 3 hours.
Oh, you could. I think. I agree. I think we could do a whole series on this.
On beliefs, most definitely. I guess what might be quite nice is just kind of like any suggestions to the people that are listening of how they can begin to maybe install new beliefs without doing the crazy research, or without.
Well, that's a great idea, and that's where I think you would be best, because your skill set on doing that quickly is, as a hypnotherapist, is probably more suited to this than mine.
Okay.
So I think that would be a really good way to finish. Maybe we could just do a few practical tips. For self-awareness and relaxation.
So obviously the subject's beliefs. So how do you identify a negative belief? So number one, you want to get a notepad out, or get yourself a little journal, or something where you can say, right, this is where I'm going to just keep all my bits together when I'm exploring what I believe to be true. It's important to kind of have that so that you can reflect back on it. And whenever you feel a negative emotion, whenever you feel sad, or whenever you feel, that your partner doesn't love you enough, or whenever you feel, anxious or scared, or anything that feels bad to you, just to sit yourself down and just allow yourself for a few minutes to just feel into that emotion and ask the question very gently, over and over, where does this come from? Where does this come from? and just try to put it into a statement that means something to you, that you feel when you say that statement, it is connected to that feeling. There you've got your negative belief.
Yeah.
How do you change it into a positive belief? Flip it on its head. If it's I'm not good enough, you want to be installing I am good enough. If it's I'm not lovable, you want to be installing I am lovable. I'm not worthy, I am worthy. You know, whatever it is. Find the most positive counterpart to your negative belief.
Yeah.
And one of the most simplistic ways, without me doing techniques and without me trying to teach you anything that might be complicated, doing it at the end of a podcast, is every single night when you go to sleep, you naturally fall into a state of hypnosis.
Yeah.
Your brain waves slow down to a point of theta, which is hypnosis, which means you have access to your subconscious mind. Begin to repeat your new belief over and over again, and it doesn't need to be for hours. I'm talking about for a few minutes while you're drifting off. Get yourself relaxed, go to sleep. As though you're going to sleep as normal, start repeating your new belief. When you can say your new belief and your physical body feels a complete sense of ease, that belief is then in your subconscious mind. What do you do next? Give some evidence to support your new belief.
Yeah.
Do that over a few days.
Reinforce
it's that simple.
Yeah.
You will feel the shift. You will know when that new belief has been accepted because you will believe it. It's that simple.
And you'll feel it in your body.
And you'll feel it in your body. Then go on to your next. And keep doing it. This is an amazing way to literally clear out all that old emotional baggage. And it's so simple. You know?
Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really good.
It's been great.
Yeah.
I've just got one caveat to that.
Yeah,
and,
go
and,
for it.
And it kind of, I wish I'd put it at the beginning
Rather than...
because it's funny. We used to have a laugh about this at college, because people used to, when people learned it, when as students we learned it, we were challenging our partners really heavily.
Yeah.
And it was quite, we used to have a laugh about how each other's partners, husbands, wives, and partners, kids and other family members and stuff used to respond to being asked and challenged, having your beliefs challenged, because having your beliefs challenged, it causes when two people with an opposing belief are communicating and those beliefs are being triggered, you've got conflict.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But the thing for people to understand is that there's a difference between a fact and a belief.
Oh, for sure.
Beliefs are one of the main thing that form the fabric of our personal reality. Yeah. And therefore they feel very real because they are underpinned by emotion most of the time, and they're very, very reinforced, and they're unconscious.
Yeah.
So we don't realise it's happening. So to ask yourself the question, is this a fact or is this a belief?
It's a good one. It's a good one because often with clients I'll say, pull the belief up, look at the belief, ask yourself if it's true. Because sometimes you've just never examined it, and just asking that question, it falls apart because your adult, more wise mind realizes it doesn't make any sense, you know. But yeah, it's been really good.
It's been great.
I really hope that the people that are listening got something out of what we were babbling on about. And,
I really hope that there's anybody listening.
Yeah, I hope that someone's listened. Even if they've not, I've enjoyed the discussion. It's been really good. And as you said, it deepens our knowledge, just exploring it.
Yeah.
And not
been
bad.
wanting to do this for a long time.
Great.
And it feels weird finally doing it.
But
fun though.
If anyone does listen, let's assume that we get at least one listener.
Yeah.
Maybe they could add some comments to let us know how they thought. We don't mind criticism because we always want to improve what we do.
What do you mean? I don't want
Tell us what you liked
I don't want to hear
about
any negative comments at all.
Tell us what you didn't like about it. give us some examples of maybe subjects you want us to cover.
Absolutely, that would be really
in the future. Cool. What are you interested in?
Yeah.
And if you're interested in us going deeper into beliefs, we can always do another one a little bit later. And we'll call it part 2.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we could go on.
Oh, I know.
For sure.
We could.
Okay.
Just one other thing that I wanted to add. Because of the situation at the moment with the isolation and just how our way of life has been affected, there's loads of really cool resources. We've given some tips today about beliefs. What if somebody really wants to do some deeper work on a one-to-one level? I know that you had made an offer online about some one-to-one therapy work, and so had I. So maybe we could just back that up and give people the links in case they want to do that.
Yeah, so obviously you had offered, I mean, you say what you've offered, doesn't you?
Yeah, I just offered some online counselling sessions that were based on, that were kind of just with donations based. It was a voluntary thing, so
cool.
you know, because of the situation financially for people, coupled with the amount of stuff that's being triggered right now through this situation, it could be a mental health crisis. So I wanted to offer some support for people through that. So if anybody wants to do some one-to-one work,
we'll put a link in.
We can put a link up with the website, and I think you did something similar.
Yeah, so I recently qualified a number of therapists that understand and practice the techniques of belief change. And, you know, obviously as being new therapists, they are really, really keen to practice their new skills.
Yeah.
But also because of the situation that we're all going through, they're also very keen to reach out and give that support, like yourself, for anyone that might need it.
Right.
Particularly if you are struggling with, you know, quite strong negative emotions and you feel a lot of conflict, you're not able to cope. Don't feel that there's no help out there, you know. We'll put a link in and you can give us a shout if you need to know more.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
Wait,
that was awesome.
We got through it.
Yeah.
No, thanks guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for this. That was great. And the next time I think I'm going to be a guest on your podcast, right?
Yeah. Can't wait.
Famous.
Yeah. No worries. Bye guys. Thank you.
Bye guys. God bless.
Bye. God bless.